So Phyllis has agreed to do the beginning part of this presentation, and I got the fun part. She did the hard part. I've got the fun part.
Yeah.
She's also a whiz with PowerPoint.
I'll be right with you, folks. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Can you all see the slides? Okay, I think I have my back to everybody, do I?
I can see you chatting, Eileen, sorry.
Can't turn myself around, so I'm just going to get started in the time frame that we have. So hello everybody, I'm Phyllis and this is David, and we are going to talk about learning theories that have application to immersive virtual environments. So you can see from our first slide that the notion of the classroom, the traditional notion, is very didactic, and students are fed information, and it can be descriptive, but it's often very abstract. It's self-contained, it doesn't have meaning outside of the classroom walls. We've all heard students say, why should I learn this? You know, learning is formal, and it may not always be relevant. So the dogmatic style may not always be effective, and learning can be passive as opposed to active. Today's learners, though, are digital natives, as we all know, and they're very comfortable with all the new technologies. They want information quickly, they multitask well, they like to use many channels to receive information and to communicate. So we looked at the marriage of constructivism and virtual worlds and found that it's one of the emerging technological avenues for delivering learning content. So next slide, please. Thank you. The cognition. The theory is that knowing is inseparable from doing, that activity is bound to many different social, cultural, and even physical contexts. So it's not a new concept. We all know that one can learn something if they do it. And in situated cognition, acquiring knowledge is done in an atmosphere that mirrors real life situations and promotes learning. Learners discover knowledge rather than having it handed to them. And keep all this in mind for when we get to David's very exciting part. So dynamic communities help situated cognition. Experts and professionals within a field can advise and facilitate learning. And the process becomes more relevant, useful, and transferable to real life situations and concepts. Some examples we all have done in the real world: field trips, study abroad, role playing. Those are situated cognitive learning situations in the actual world. And you all know that I'm an instructor, and I utilize this in class all the time for my students. I've taken them to a showroom for a merchandising class where learners are then in a place of business. They can see three-dimensional garments, not just one-dimensional printed or screen images. And experts are on hand, such as myself, the instructor, or the vendor, to ask questions from, and students can discuss all this amongst themselves at the appointments. So we all know it works in the real world. Students can apply knowledge, they can draw conclusions, and really structure knowledge, and that increases learner motivation. Next slide, please. We missed one. No, we didn't. I'm sorry, Eileen. I apologize. There we go. All right. So the 4 learning theories we're going to look at are in front of you. So the constructivist theory, or constructivism, is sort of a root of cognitive apprenticeship and situated cognition, and it's often referred to as discovery learning. It's based on the idea that experience provides the best mode of learning, and that allows for reflection and collaboration and all that good stuff. Learners take time to think about what they're doing, and it creates opportunities for learners to use the knowledge. Problem-solving activities and learning is immediate, as opposed to learners sitting and typing a paper at midnight or circling an answer on an exam. So cognitive apprenticeship is really the enculturation of authentic practices, what you would really be doing, into activities and social interaction. So learners understand and embrace the innuendo of concepts through experimentation and self-learning. Think of the cobbler of yore. So instructors in cognitive apprenticeship really model behavior and work closely with learners and provide scaffolding and encouragement and encourage learners to reflect. Experiential learning really builds on situated cognitive learning, and that's the process of making meaning from a direct experience. The experience teaches you as opposed to didactic learning. So ET supports the idea that people can learn on their own, and it's really good for adults, and it uses environmental factors and emotions to learn. Great example, think of learning to drive a car. You learn through the 7 steps that are part of experiential learning, which is setting goals, thinking, planning, experimentation, reflecting, observation, review. And if you start to think about that in immersive spaces in relation to these steps, it could have some pretty amazing capabilities. Okay. Backwards design is a emerging school of thought on instructional design. And again, it's backwards. It starts with the learning outcomes in mind, and you build curricula and assessments and instructions to support those goals. So in backwards design, the first step is to identify what you want your students to learn, the learning goals. Second, you plan the tasks or the activities that they will do to learn. And last, you create the course content. And another version of that that's really emerging in instructional design is the inverted classroom. And here are lectures and homework switch places or flipped. So lectures become homework, face-to-face time is spent practicing, and instructors are really facilitators. And it's been very successful in higher education as adults are really very able to learn information independently. Huge benefits in that it's more inclusive, interactive, instructors are experts, and honestly, it isn't necessary in today's e-mediated environments to have a human recite a lecture. You're probably all bored by me right now. So it can be delivered through a much larger variety of modalities. So I'm going to pass this off to David now, and he's going to show you some of the ways in which this can be implemented in e-mediated environments.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Phyllis. I wish I could actually use my marshmallow stick as a pointer, but I haven't quite figured that out yet. As I said, Phyllis has left me with a lot of the fun part of this, because given that we believe there's good research behind situated cognition, and I think all of our personal experiences, all of our common sense really leads us to believe that people learn best by doing. Well, it's not always possible, as many of you know, to go out and do things with a whole class of 20 students, or with adolescents, or all the problems that are inherent in it. But virtual and mediated environments now give us a real opportunity, which we'll argue in the end we think is underutilized, that you can do so much. You can set up so many things in a mediated environment that, while they might not be as good as actually being there, might be your best option. So the first thing is, gosh, we can do field trips. Some of these pictures here, I don't know if everyone can see them. We fortunately, Phyllis reined me in from putting lots of teeny tiny pictures. But you can see here on the one of them, I'm sitting on a Mars rover. So you can actually have interplanetary field trips with your class. You can go to China. That one in the bottom is from a Chinese artist's island. And or in the zoo, up in the top right corner, you can actually get in the cage with the bear. Fortunately, the bears don't attack or anything, they just kind of sit there. So, you know, you have a real opportunity to bring students into a more direct, obviously it's mediated, obviously it's virtual, but it's a more direct contact where they can interact, where they can play with things, where things can happen to them. For example, with that Mars rover, there was a classroom set up on Mars, and there was a podium, and I hadn't been there very long before there was some kind of meteor strike and flames all over the place, and fortunately I was virtual, so there weren't any liability issues for the students, and then I could clamber aboard the Mars rover. So there, it really just brings out a lot of opportunities for spending time with a subject in a way that we just can't do in a traditional classroom, where things are abstract and summarized and handed to the people. We could go to the next slide, and I'll try and pick things up. Mine's quick and easy to understand, my part.
Sorry, David, I didn't mean to be rude there. I'm just hoping if everyone can stay a little bit longer, because all of this is too interesting to cut short. Mm-hmm. So, and you will all get the slides. I'll send them out, but I will turn my mic off so you can speak without hearing echoes.
Not at all. So the hands-on nature of virtual or mediated realities is also something that you just can't do in many classrooms. And the fact that situations can be created expressly to teach a topic, and they're replicable. There's something that you can set up, and you know that every time the student gets there, there will be a situation that they can start and they can go through and they can learn, and if they haven't learned it, they can do it again. In fact, it's open 24/7, so they can even come back outside of class time. This example here on the photo, by the way, is just a terraforming sandbox, where you can see on the left, it's just flat ground, and I was learning how to terraform and raise the earth, which is fun. We can go to the next slide. Experiential learning, direct experience. Presence pedagogy, of course, is we learned about in a couple of the readings, and really virtual and mediated realities provide a very fertile ground, just a wonderful place, I think, for people to come in where instructor-peer, they have a slightly different interaction than they would in the real world, where, you know, if there is a teacher there, for example, even if it's not from your class, you might ask that person a question. You might ask a question of a complete stranger if you were interested and outgoing enough. In Chinese, there's a saying, Confucius, of course, that if there are 3 people walking on a road together, one of them will be the teacher at any given time. And so in these virtual realities in places like Second Life. You can have a community of practice where people can interact, and they've come there expressly to be involved in something. So if you're interested, for example, in fantasy or dragons or elves, like we saw in our initial visit to, I'll get the name wrong, but Weirin. You go there because you're interested in that kind of thing, and you find people who are also there because they're interested in learning about or studying or furthering their involvement with that. So you can find very positive participatory cultures and interact. So. And there's almost a bit of a Socratic approach, really, because all this questioning, asking questions of people, finding out what they know. You can construct an online environment that fosters that kind of collaboration. One thing, in terms of conclusions, there seem to be, if we take as a given that situated cognition is an excellent way to learn in the real world, and a very natural way to, a very natural way to learn. That's how young people, even young animals, learn, is they interact, they play, they wrestle with a topic, they interact with it in the real world, not in an abstract way or summarized as teachers might provide in traditional classrooms. If we take that as a true point, then it seems like there are a lot of attractive possibilities in the mediated realities. But I'd have to say, in the limited research we've done, or certainly the limited research I've done, there seems to be, it seems very underutilized. And there seem to be some drawbacks that are getting in the way, that are providing barriers, but are also providing hurdles further on as people get involved. So we're curious as to why there were not a lot of research to be found that's recent. Much of it dates back to the middle of, sort of the 2005, 2006, that time when Second Life seems to have been in its heyday. One sort of more scholarly, more scientific paper that I did find was an interesting study done with doctors, and they did a nice job of collecting data on their case study, where they were trying to do refresher courses for doctors who in this case working with diabetics, and refreshing them on current skills and modern practices. And they've normally in the traditional situation, they'd either done that in person, sort of one-on-one, which often requires travel, or they had done that with a phone call, or perhaps an online system of forums. And they found that using Second Life Island, they could actually do role play by having patients come in, avatars that even could physically make themselves appear to be the patients, and could act and could interact as patients. They had the doctor talking about the modern skills, and importantly, the audience was able to participate in real time without interrupting the lecture, much as people have been doing tonight by texting to each other, so that they could hear everybody's question without interrupting the speaker and without slowing things down. And people who were maybe otherwise shy about asking their questions or raising their hand in a class could be involved in the discussion in a very active and contemporaneous way. Lastly, I guess we could go into some of the drawbacks, but one of the interesting things that Phyllis mentioned yesterday, that had come up in some conversations that she had was that there's this issue. We were talking about sort of why isn't it more accepted? Why isn't it more broadly embraced by educational institutions? And one answer that came back, in addition to the normal sort of drawbacks of technical issues and learning curve to get started, tech issues when you're already in there, or the poor teacher having to multitask so much when you've got all those questions coming at the same time, was this idea that there are problems. You have to be, if you want to have a group participate in an activity in virtual reality, you have to have them synced up. You have to have a synchronous time. You have to have them all in the area at the same time. Geography makes no difference. Geography is a strength in terms of if you have a dispersed population of people who want to participate, that's a real strength because you can bring people from all around the world together in the same room at the same time, but it has to be kind of at the same time. So yeah, it'd be neat to have different languages involved in one, and I could totally imagine that happening, just as it would in the real world. If you bring people together, if you can get them all in the same room, which this gives you more of a chance to do so. If you can get them all in the same room together, you can have the interactions, but you do have to have them there at the same time. And if I'm sure you've all noticed that it's a little bit boring wandering around Second Life by yourself sometimes, because an important part of being in Second Life or being in these mediated realities is the fact that they are real people on the other side of those avatars, and you can learn from them, and you can interact with them in a way that you can't with the scenery. Where, even if it's well programmed, the parrot always says the same things, but a person is unpredictable, and that makes it exciting.